Have you ever noticed that the NIV Bible compared to the King James Version is missing verses? I have seen people die on this hill to say that the King James Version is the best because it's the earliest Bible. Well, let's talk about what the real issue is. Well, the real issue at the heart of this debate is actually Greek manuscripts. You see, the NIV and the KJV were actually translated from different Greek manuscripts. So the question is, which one is better? Which one's better? To start, the New Testament wasn't written in English. It was written in Koine Greek. And we don't have the original copies. I know, it sounds weird. We don't have original copies. But what we do have are thousands of copies from different areas of the world, and some are just even fragments. And some have a very early date, like as early as 125 AD. And some copies were produced, though, much later, like the 12th century. And they don't all read exactly the same. So the King James Version was published in 1611 and was translated from what's called the Textus Receptus. And that Greek text was compiled in the 1500s by Erasmus. What a legend. But he only had access to a handful of Greek manuscripts, and most of them were from around the 12th century and later. And these manuscripts belong to what scholars call the Byzantine or the majority text types. And this is like a late date Greek manuscript. So the King James Version is based off Greek manuscripts that were from the 12th century and older. So these are quite old. New. They're new. But the New International Version, on the other hand, was first published in 1970. In the 1970s. And it would be a logical fallacy, though, to assume that because the NIV was published almost 500 years after the King James Version, that the King James Version would be a more superior text because it's closer to the original. When in fact, the NIV is translated and is based on what we call the critical text. So things like the NA28 and the UBS editions. And this Greek manuscript, which was different to the one that was that the King James Version is based off. This Greek text draws from a much larger pool of manuscripts, including some that are far older. For example, manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus date to the 4th century. Do you know we also have some early papyrus fragments that go way back to the 2nd and the 3rd century? So these are so old. So is the newer English translation then actually the older Greek translation? So why then are some of the verses missing in the NIV? Because I tell you, I see this debate all over the internet. And a couple of examples from this are from Matthew 17:21 or John 5:4. And you see the King James Version includes phrases that were found in later Greek manuscripts. But those verses were actually absent from the earliest and most diverse Greek manuscripts that we have. Can you see the issue there? And so we've got these really old dated manuscripts and these younger dated manuscripts. Which one is more accurate? Modern translations, though, usually place them and these missing verses in footnotes because scholars believe that they were like later additions to the scripture. Often they were explanatory notes that gradually became part of the copied text when it was copied over and over and again. But it's important to understand this. Modern translations are not removing scripture to water it down. What they're actually trying to do is they're trying to reconstruct the earliest attainable wording of the New Testament using far more manuscript evidence than was available in 1611. But does that mean then that the King James Version is bad or outdated? Well, it was based on the best manuscript evidence at the time, and it changed history forever. What a blessing. Today, we simply just have access to way more manuscripts. And at the end of the day, no core Christian doctrine actually hangs on these textual differences between the King James Version and the NIV. The debate is really about textual history and manuscript evidence. So when someone asks why the NIV takes verses out, a better question is to ask which manuscripts are you following and interpreting from and why? And that's where the real conversation begins. But if you're interested in exploring this more, the school of thought is called textual criticism, and I encourage you to check it out. Super fascinating.